We're going to talk real quick about audio plugins to use for streaming or audio manipulation on Reaper, Audacity, whatever. Anyways, so this is OBS, as you can see, and one of my sources is the microphone. And when I look at the filters, you can see I'm running a compressor, an EQ, a noise gate, and a limiter. This is a dynamic microphone, which means it's less sensitive to background noise. A lot of y'all probably have a condenser microphone, which means it's very sensitive and it can hear a lot, even the sound of the air around you. And it's kind of loud. So you might add another plugin called noise suppression. OBS has a really good noise suppressor and noise gate, so those I would use stock from the program. What we're going to do is we're going to download a free compressor, EQ, and limiter off the internet, and then we're going to go over how to use it. So go on the internet, go to splice.com and go to the plugins tab. Now, in order to get Splice free plugins, you need to create an account. Don't worry about that though. It's okay to have an account on Splice because Splice is a really cool website where you can get a lot of cool sounds, you can get loops, you can get instruments for making music, whatever. It's okay to have an account on Splice, so don't worry about it. But you'll need to make one in order to get the free plugins. So I went to plugins on Splice. I've already created an account. You'll need to do that. Over here in categories, we have DAW, which stands for Digital Audio Workstation. That's like Audacity, Reaper programs, software for your computer for audio. We don't need instruments, we need effects. So these are all the effects plugins that they have to offer. There's a lot. So we're going to narrow it down. Right here's the drop-down list. So say we're looking for an EQ, right? We'll hit EQ and it's only going to show us equalizers. Well, one thing that we want to do is we want it to be free. We want it to be available for download, and that only leaves us with one option. So we'll click the Marvel CQ, and right here I already have it, so mine says own, but yours will have a download button. So you'll download it and add it to the computer. And whenever it downloads, it'll already be in the correct location. You don't need to move it around. It should be where it needs to be. So there's the EQ. Back to effects, drop down list. We're going to go to dynamics. This is where we're going to get the compressor and the limiter. So we're going to narrow it down by clicking free and available for download. Now we've only got 3 options. This one is a multi-band compressor, which is not what we need. That's too complex for what you need, so don't get that one. Right here, Rough Rider, this is a compressor. Loud Max, this is the limiter. So you want to download both of these, Rough Rider and Loud Max. Okay. Once all those get saved to the computer, we're going to add them to OBS. I'm sure you already know how to add filters, you know. This isn't Streamlabs OBS. This is a different kind of OBS, so I don't know what Streamlabs looks like, but I'm sure you add filters in some sort of form or fashion. You add them one at a time to the microphone source. One thing I'll say is it matters what order they're in. So whenever I talk into the microphone, it goes into the compressor first, then the EQ, then the noise gate, and then the limiter. So it goes in order. And it's important to understand the path that your audio takes on the way through the system, especially with things like the noise gate. So the noise gate, you know, is a plugin that basically says, hey, if the audio coming into the microphone is a certain volume, I want people to hear it. If it gets low enough, I want the microphone to be muted. You do that to mitigate background noise. That's why a lot of times you can hear a noise gate kick on and off depending on the volume of the sound going into the microphone. But anyways, as I was saying, right here, since it's third in line, that means that my audio is being compressed, it's being EQ'd, and then it's going into the noise gate. So I have the volume set for voice that's already been compressed and EQ'd. If I move the noise gate to the top, then I want the noise gate I'm going to have to readjust the settings on the noise gate because it will be listening to voice that's uncompressed and un-EQ'd, and I'll have to set it accordingly because it will be going into the noise gate first. So you need to pay attention to what order you're putting these in. Probably the noise gate could be first, but I've already got the levels set for it being third in line, so we're going to leave it there. You do want the limiter last, though, I will say that. But anyway, so let's go into the compressor. I don't know how on Streamlabs you add an audio filter or whatever program you're using, but on here, you just hit the plus mark and you go down here to VST and you can pick the Rough Rider from the list. That's the free one that we just downloaded. So you go in here, basically, what a compressor does, this is the compressor. Basically what a compressor does is, here is an audio signal. Blue is the original sound. What happens is a compressor will say, any noise that goes above a certain threshold, I want to squash it down. And anything that's beneath that threshold don't affect. So you'll see right here, this always has been this volume, but these peaks were loud originally. And what the compressor did is it took the loud parts of the audio and it squished it down. And now, if you look at just the red, it's almost the same volume all the way across, whereas originally it had high points and low points. Once it runs through a compressor, it's all even. So you've got low sound, you've got high sound, and the compressor takes the high sound and pushes it down. So now everything is compressed into this nice little brick to where there's no dynamic range anymore. That's what a compressor is doing. So in here, the ratio is saying, how hard do you want to bring down like how hard do you want to compress it? So whenever it is too high, do you want to bring it down really hard or just a little bit? The ratio is how drastic do you want to pull that audio down. I've got mine set low because you don't want to over compress. Because over compression sounds really harsh. The only reason why you would turn the ratio up is if the compressor barely kicked on and it only hit like the very tip top of sound, then you could get away with a high ratio. But what we're doing here is we're having the compressor affect a lot of the audio, so the ratio is turned down. We want to take a lot of it and bring it down a little bit, so the ratio is set low. Also over here we have a sensitivity knob that I have turned up pretty high. So there's a kind of a correspondence between the ratio and the sensitivity. If the compressor was not very sensitive and barely ever kicked on, but when it did, the ratio was really high and it brought it down really hard, that would be okay. But to have the compressor always hitting and a high ratio, we would be squashing the sound so much that it would sound really bad. So you don't want to over compress too much at once. So since this is step one, we have a low ratio, but we also have our sensitivity turned up pretty high. Now what I did for this is I set the ratio low on purpose and I listened to my voice in real time by turning on a monitoring system. While I spoke and listened to myself, I adjusted the sensitivity. So I listened for it to sound better and better as I turned the knob so I could find a spot using my ears. But it correlates with the fact that, well, it makes sense that the ratio is low and the sensitivity is high. So you don't necessarily need to cram that up. It just worked for me. This is technically the threshold point, the point at which when audio surpasses it, it's time to start squishing it down. So the sensitivity is basically like, at what point are we saying audio that goes past it needs to get brought down? Attack and release is a little bit too, you won't really probably be able to hear the difference in your position. It's really good for certain instruments to adjust the attack and release, but it won't affect your sound too much. It's basically saying how fast do you want the compressor to kick on whenever it's time, whenever it gets triggered by the threshold. How quick should the compressor activate? That's the attack. And how long should it take the compressor to let go? That's the release. I've got the release at a midway point, and I've taken the attack and I've made it slightly faster than just mid-range. Okay, so the makeup gain is really important because if we've got the lows down here, we've got the highs up here, and we squash the high end down so everything is a nice little brick down here in the bottom. Now everything is quiet as a group, right? So now makeup gain is, let's take that's been compressed and let's lift it back up so it's loud again, right? Let's move it up as a group. So makeup gain is what that is. We've taken the high end, we squished it down into a nice little pack, and now makeup gain is to lift it back up. EQ, this is the free EQ that we just downloaded. Ignore the orange on this one. The only things that are actually manipulating the sound are the white ones. So flat would be zeros all the way across. I haven't manipulated this too much. I haven't done anything fancy. I've only done two things. I've taken those super duper lows and I've brought them all the way down to non-existent, and I've taken the whole high end and I've lifted it up slightly. You'll see up here this number represents the frequency of that fader. So this fader specifically manipulates 2000 hertz, and I've lifted it up 3 dB. So what I've done is I've taken everything from 2000 up and I've raised it up 3 dB. I've done that so I've raised basically the treble in my voice so it's more present, it's easier to hear, and it cuts through your device, your mobile device, your computer speakers, your headphones, so you can hear me better. And I've taken this fader and I've raised it halfway up because I want to create a nice slope. Basically, if this is raised up to 3 dB and these are at 0, I've used this fader as kind of like an in-between so it can slope up to the fact that I want everything from 2K up raised up 3 dB. So that's why those are up. Now over here, this is the low end, and you'll see that this is 20 decibels, which is as low as the human ear could possibly hear. So this is some very low frequencies, and I've cut these all the way down to off because you don't want those frequencies in your speaking human voice. Like that's just way too deep and way too boomy. Like if you're playing music and you're talking, you want your music to have those frequencies because that's why we have sub, you know, that's where the bass is. So I don't want my voice to be fighting with the bass and the music, you know. Plus this is way too deep. All it's gonna do is cause the depth of my voice to like make your speakers vibrate and stuff, and it's just too much power for that low. Plus whenever you drop these, it'll really clean up your voice because there's no reason for my voice to be down in this range at all. So that's why these are cut completely off. This fader though, the 50 hertz, actually manipulates the sound of my voice. If I took this one and I cut it all the way down to -12, you would almost hear a lack of bass in my voice. Like you would be missing it. You would think you want some bass back. So it's important that I don't drop that one all the way down because then we'd be losing too much bass. I listened to this in real time and I felt like it helped to bring this down, but not all the way down. So that's why I used it as the perfect fader to kind of make a slope between the two. That's why that one's at -6, because it's kind of like, I want to bring this one down a little bit, but not all the way down. And it's perfect to make like a nice slope. So that's all we're doing here is completely getting rid of the subsonic lows and then raising everything on the high end. And then the noise gate, I already told you what that does. You'll have to set that according to your system. But anyways, a limiter, this one is really easy to set up. But it makes a difference. So it's only got two settings, the threshold and the output. So a limiter is really cool because it's basically a compressor, but with the ratio cranked all the way up. It's like a really hard stop. So basically, let's say you're talking and sometimes some of your noises spike into the red, you know? And that's what happens is what this is good for is you might think, well, I want to keep turning it up because it's not loud enough, but it's already pegging the red, but I can't turn it up even more because there's still too much dynamic range. So when you want to bring the body of it up, you keep raising up the high end, and those spikes in volume keep slapping the red, or they're too loud, and so you don't have any headroom left to raise your volume up. So what a limiter does is it says, all right, let's set a threshold of -3 decibels. You can see here on the meter that we've got 0, -6, maybe -5, -10. So these numbers are in relation to an actual meter, whereas 0 is anything past 0 would be actual audio clipping and audio distortion. So what we're saying is hey, how about this? Any audio that hits -3 dB or higher, when it hits that point, 100% completely put a hard stop on it and don't let it pass. So say I've got these spikes in volume and some of them go up as high as -3 dB or higher on the little meter down here, right? Well, we're putting such a hard stop on it that we're putting a cap on all of our audio to not go past that point with a really firm, abrupt compressor. That's what a limiter is. It's an extreme compressor. But here's the cool part. Since we're putting that hard stop on the volume and not letting it go past -3 dB, what we're doing is we're creating headspace. So what we can do is we can crank the audio up because there's such a hard stop at -3 that we're lowering the dynamics even more, and now we're able to take our volume and crank it up even more without distorting or clipping or sending sounds over the edge. So this is just as simple as leaving the output at 0 and the threshold. I've set the threshold at -3 because that's pretty standard. Let's imagine you have a sound that's really quiet and you need to put a lot of volume into it. Well, what you would do is you would take the threshold and keep turning it down. This is so automated and so easy to use that simply the lower you turn this threshold, the more you're going to keep pumping the volume up. So mine is at -3, so you'll notice here in a second when I cut it on, it's going to make me a little bit louder. But if I had brought it down to -6, it would be a huge, crazy volume impact. You would just slam audio in your face. So that would be too much. But if you had a really quiet sound and you really needed to crank it up, and you could put this loud max on, you could bring the threshold all the way down to -6 or even lower. If you have a really quiet sound, you can bring the threshold all the way down here to -18, and it'll do all the work for you, and it'll take your sound and it'll bring it way up to where it'll register really loud and proud. So that's what the compressor is. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to turn these off. Now that you understand what each of them does, we're going to turn them off and we're going to turn them on one at a time, and you'll be able to hear live what's happening to my voice. All right. Okay, so this is me talking exactly the same with no filters on my voice. This is a $20 microphone that's just going right into the computer. Let me get a drink of water real quick. So the first thing that we're going to cut on is the compressor. Okay, now that the compressor is on, this one is probably going to make the biggest difference. of all of them. The compressor is probably the most important plugin for you to have figured out when it comes to recording audio for your streams or for your videos, or making music for that matter. Remember, we've done two things. We've lowered the dynamic range and we've boosted the volume. So we've done a lot with just that compressor, and you can probably hear it. Now, if you'll listen to my voice right now, it's not EQ'd yet. So what we're going to do now is when we add the EQ, we're going to do two things. Remember, we're going to take the high end and we're going to add more volume to it. And we're going to take those really, really, really lows and we're going to get rid of them. So if you listen to if you listen to the lows of my voice and the highs of my voice, they're going to change. Okay, so now we have the EQ activated. So two things should have happened. Kind of that really muddy low end that wasn't necessary is gone. And then the high end I've added for clarity and presence in like the mix, to help me stand out, because my voice is the most important thing when broadcasting. Also, there's no noise gate on yet, so there's unwanted noise. The microphone is not cutting off and on. You can hear everything. So if I go back here and I make a noise or something, it's still part of the audio. So now that I've cut on the noise gate, you can tell that the microphone only punches in and out whenever I'm making noise. It's basically saying, if I'm not making enough noise, then the microphone should be at absolute silence. That's good for not picking up background noise. Like if I'm not talking and there's a quiet noise in the background, it won't trigger the noise gate and you won't be able to hear it. So remember what I said about the limiter? All it's going to do is basically give me a volume boost. I only put my threshold at -3, so it won't be that big of a difference, but believe me, that little bit that I added helps. I just activated the limiter, and you can tell that I just basically I cranked up the volume a little bit more without allowing the signal to start clipping and peaking. So just those quick little effects that I've downloaded for free and added to the program have turned this $20 microphone into somewhat of a good audio experience. All right, that's that.